Okay, now that we have both of our distributors out, we can compare them side by side, and they do look the same, except for the one thing, like we've been discussing, is the gears, and they do look a little bit different. So if you look at the two gears, you can see that this new one looks to be an iron gear, as it's got a smooth machine finish, versus what came out of the truck has this porous texture to it, which is usually pretty indicative of being a melanized gear. I'm not sure exactly what camshaft is in this truck. Supposedly it was gone through at some point in time and refreshed. When that was done, I don't know if they went to a roller cam or not. Roller meaning it's the type of lifter and camshaft. It has a physical roller that's in constant contact. I'm not going to dive too deep into that, but it'd be as opposed to a flat tappet, which is, you know, flat top and there's lash and there's some stuff, right? But anyways, you would use an iron gear with a flat tappet camshaft, and you would want to use a melanized or a bronze gear with a hydraulic or a roller camshaft. And since I don't know which we have in here, and it does appear like the old distributor does have a melanized gear on it, I'm probably just gonna play it safe and swap the gears on them. It's pretty simple. All you have to do is just, I'll try to see if I get it close enough. You have this roll pin that is in the gear, and you just need to drive that out, and this gear will slide off the shaft. We'll do the same thing to the old distributor and just get them swapped. And then we should be back in business, and we'll try to get this bad boy dropped in and hope that we can get back on that oil pump shaft without throwing off all of our measurements for timing. So I'm gonna knock these roll pins out and swap the gears and then get back to it. Alrighty, I got the gear swapped over, and let me tell you something. It was a royal pain in the ass to get this thing on. Well, actually not necessarily getting it on. It was getting this steel gear off of this new distributor is a pain. It's actually pretty easy to get the old one off the old distributor, which usually it works the other way around. But after heat and eventually 3-jaw pliers with a little modification so that I could not fall in the hole for the oil pump drive, we got it on. So yeah. So going back in is gonna probably be a little tricky, but yeah, I'm hoping that oil pump gear or the shaft for it isn't really far off whenever we go to try to put this back in, because then we're not gonna, if it is, we're not gonna be able to use our method here of just dropping this into the way it was set before. So let's hope that drops in fairly close. You know, it's not gonna be perfect, but I'd like to get it hopefully at least close enough to where we get the truck started again and then just dial it in the rest of the way with the timing light. All right, so whenever you go to reinstall this, since these are not straight cut gears, you actually need to have your rotor here a little bit, again, it all goes on the rotation, needs to be a little bit back so that whenever we set it in, it will rotate it where we need it to be. So about 1 tooth back. So we know that we're aiming for our mark, which is right here. Just as a refresher, we know that this was about right there. So we want to set this, we'll try it like right there, since this is where we're aiming at. And then over there. What I was afraid was going to happen, happened. With that shaft pulling out, the oil pump shaft, it threw off how we had everything set up. So now the distributor's lining up with the cam gear. The distributor and cam gears are meshing and lining up how we planned on it, but it's not fully seating on that oil pump rod. So what we're gonna need to do is crank over the engine, and that will spin the distributor, and it'll get to a certain point where it will line up with that shaft and it will drop down on it. And so it's not a huge deal, but we're going to be shifting gears on how we're gonna time this. So I guess this video is gonna give two ways of doing it. If your shaft doesn't pull out, then you could do what we were discussing we were gonna do. But now that we're in this case, we're going to have to turn it over, get it to fully seat in, and then we're gonna have to pull the number one spark plug and get it on, find top dead center, and then set the timing based off of that, which I'd kind of like to change the way the orientation of the distributor anyways. The vacuum diaphragm, in my opinion, is a little too far over. I'd like it aiming straight. So this gives me the opportunity to fix it, which honestly, whenever the last person, I guess, if they did rebuild this engine or refresh it or whatever they did or did not do, they probably were off like a tooth whenever they did it, and they just changed where they had their number one plug. But anyways, it's neither here nor there. We'll get this adjusted. It's just something that happens. No big deal. So if you look, we are close, but not all the way seated. So what we're gonna wanna do is I have a trigger starter. You just jump the solenoid. Hopefully this trigger is not bad, because I think I got two and one of them was not working. So we should just be able to, as long as this is working, bump this button and it should suck down that distributor. So let's give it a shot. Well, there you go. I think we found it. All right, that sucks. All right, so since that trigger was not wanting to work, what we're gonna need to do is use the ratchet on the crank and do this by hand, the old school way. All right, so as I turn this over, it should suck this distributor down whenever we get to the right point. And the plot thickens. So whenever I had to swap out these gears, the end of the shaft got a little mushroomed, should we say. And so now we have a snug fit oil drive shaft. And yeah, so I'm gonna try to install this whole thing in one piece. So that's a lot of fun. Let me mess around with this for a little bit. I'll get it in and then we'll jump on the timing. So that literally took about no time flat whenever I got the shaft put into the distributor first. So it's fully sat down. We need to find top dead center on the number one cylinder. And then wherever, it doesn't really matter where the rotor is facing per se. We can set whatever adjustments we want now. We could choose whatever part of the cap that we want to be cylinder one, and it's no big deal as long as the timing is right and the firing order is correct. That's all that really matters with this. All right, so what I'm gonna need to do now that we have this distributor is set down and it's fully meshed with the oil pump and that cam gear, what we're gonna need to do is turn this over by hand. And then as we're cranking this, we want to feel, I took the spark plug out of cylinder one, and we wanna feel, don't stick your finger in the hole, but over it, and you want to feel for compression wherever it will want to push your thumb or whatever finger you use off of the cylinder head. And then at the same time, we have our timing mark down here, and I marked 12 degrees with a paint marker on this balancer, and then we want to be on that mark on our compression stroke. So the white line might come around once, and it might be on the exhaust stroke. And if that's the case, we need to cycle the engine over another full rotation to get our compression stroke. So let's get to it. All right, so perfect example. If you look at the timing, we're a little bit past it, and you can see that white paint marker. I did not feel any resistance or any compression trying to push my thumb off of the cylinder head and For that reason, we need to cycle through again because we're on the exhaust stroke on cylinder 1. Now we need to rotate it again and we'll be on the compression stroke. Okay, I don't know if you could hear it in the video, but I had compression on that stroke. We can audibly hear it as well as physically feel the resistance. And now we came around and we got our paint marker. This is about 12 degrees before top dead center, which is what this engine is engineered to be set at. And so that's lined up, so we should be pretty good. So now we could take off the ratchet off the crank and then finish setting up our timing on the distributor itself. All right, so now that we have our timing set up as far as being 12 degrees before top dead center, now we're gonna wanna look at our rotor. And if you're doing an initial setup on an engine, it's good practice to get the rotor to face the number 1 cylinder. But in this case, we're just gonna work with it because it really doesn't matter the orientation of that rotor, again, as long as you have the timing set correctly for your plug wires and the way they land on the cap. So with this, the way this is set up, I actually like the way that this is all aligned. So I'm gonna tighten this down because we're gonna use this again as our marker, which is what we were doing initially, or which was our initial plan. And we're gonna leave our rotor there, tighten down the base, and then whenever we set the cap, we're gonna call whatever lands here is gonna be the number 1 cylinder. And then we'll just set our plugs accordingly after that. I did make one little change. Instead of having this as a reference mark, I put a paint marker here, and I'll show you the same thing on the cap. And the reason I did that was because there's not one of these studs, whatever you want to call it, nipples, titties, that pops up, that lines up with that clip. So what I did was I got it to the closest one, and I put a paint marker on the base and one on the cap. So that way we know that those will line up, and that's in line with this one. And then whenever I took off the cap, I just rotated the base of the distributor until that paint mark lined up with the tip of the rotor. So now this is going to become our cylinder 1, and then we're just going to go counterclockwise with the way that the plugs are on this other old cap. Okay, we're all put back together. So our distributor is fully tightened down with the hold down. We have our vacuum advance put on, our electrical connection plugged back in, and then we verified our firing order and made sure everything was hooked up the right way. And so we should be back in business. Now, before I start the truck, I do want to get the one valve cover taken off. And the reason for that is I don't have a working oil pressure gauge in this truck yet. And without that, there's the only way to really check that I know of, that I can think of, check to make sure you have oil pressure and that shaft is fully in the oil pump and rotating, is to pop off the valve cover and check to see if you have oil coming up through the push rods. And that's going to be verification that we're getting oil pressure and that that pump is pumping the oil throughout the engine. Because if not, this engine, toast. So I want to verify that before we just let it run and start setting the timing and then wonder why the engine stopped on us all of a sudden. So let me get that done. All right, so we got the valve cover taken off. I undid the plug that goes to the coil, so that way we're not getting spark, because we don't want the engine to run. What I want to do first is just turn over the engine just with the starter without it firing, and we want to verify that we're getting oil coming up through the push rods, which if you can see, there's a little hole, go focus, in the rocker where the push rods are hollow. So oil will come up through there, and we should see some of it coming down in the rocker arm, kind of like where you can see is evidence where it comes down. And as long as we're getting oil up there, we know that our oil pump is turning. And then once that's the case, we get this valve cover put back on and then dial in the timing. Good. Alrighty, so you can see we're having oil pool up in the bottom of the rocker arms, which means that we are getting oil pressure, and that oil pump is circulating oil. So we are in good shape. Time to get this valve cover put back on, and then we will dial in the timing if it needs to even be adjusted at all. All right, so we have everything put back together. So now we're ready to set the timing light on it and adjust it. So let's get to it. All right, guys, we got the new distributor installed and the timing set. We had a few hiccups, but the silver lining to that is that we got to see a couple potential issues that you could run into if you're going to be doing this, especially on a Ford with that style of oil pump shaft, where it has a higher likelihood of coming out with the distributor whenever you are moving it. And then we also got to see two different ways of how to control or set your timing whenever you're replacing the distributor. So the second method that we used, that we ended up having to use to finish this installation, could be used on vehicles that are already running or engines that are fresh rebuilds or whatever. So hopefully you guys got some benefit from it, and we did fix our hard start issue too. I'll start the truck here in a second, but before that, I just want to say thank you guys all for watching. I appreciate it very much. And you guys get outside, get wrenching on something, piss off your neighbor, disappoint your mom. Until next time, keep on keeping on. Let's get this truck started.
Make